Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples integrated recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice, no sugarcoating, no platitudes, no bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating the same old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, today's another neuroscience episode, but I'm going to try to keep it not too jargony so that you can still follow it with lived experience. A couple of years ago, I used to run an addiction group. I ran an IOP program that's intensive outpatient. So 3-hour groups, a couple days a week. And they got a kick out of me telling this silly story about my addictive thinking, even though I am in long-term addiction recovery. This example sounds so small and so minuscule and silly compared to that many of them, their lives were actively on fire from losing jobs, coming in from a DUI, a partner that had recently left them. And I've been there through all of that, but I wanted to illustrate for them how the addictive thinking and the addictive wiring exists even for somebody in long-term addiction recovery. So here I am at Walmart in the cereal aisle, which there's nothing in a cereal aisle for me that I should be eating. But here I am looking at a bag of granola, like a pound of granola, and telling myself, this time it's going to be different. I'm going to portion it out. I'm going to be reasonable. I'm going to put it in different little Ziploc bags. I'm going to take some of it to the office. I'm going to do every story that you can think of. And this time it's going to be different because I'm aware of my patterns. And then, as I'm binge watching some Netflix or getting the munchies at 2 o'clock in the morning, the whole 1 pound bag is gone. They're like, granola? Really? Yeah. And probably peanut butter was involved too. And then the next morning, I'm irritated. My guts feel terrible. I'm physically off, trying to push through cardio to make up for, so I'm going to go do 400 calorie cardio for the 8,000 calories that I ate at 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, right. I knew before I bought it. I knew before I opened it. I knew the whole sequence, and I still did it. That's the doorway into understanding addiction. Because the question is deeper than, why don't people know better? They know better. They know the cost. They know the pattern. They know the aftermath. They know what happened last time. The real question is, why does this behavior still gain power when the person already has so much information? And that's where neuroscience is important. I have found that I really love the science because for years when I was in these addictive patterns, especially with the active substance use, I was just dumbfounded how, knowing the cost, that I still did the same stuff over and over and over again. So I have found the neuroscience to be kind of freeing. It pulls some of the moralizing out of it, and hopefully you will find that helpful too. I'm going to use some probably big words, but hopefully it's going to all make sense. The brain is constantly assigning value before conscious reasoning has caught up. It's scanning the body state, emotional memory, fatigue, stress, learned associations, and previous times that reward was delivered. So I'm going to use OFC to describe this a lot, this process, but it stands for orbitofrontal cortex, OFC. And it helps evaluate what matters right now And right now is the key phrase, because under one state, the future cost is clear, but under a different state, then the immediate relief becomes louder or makes more sense. So when the thought shows up of, I'm just going to portion this granola out, sounds like I'm making a decision, and a lot of times the system has already leaned toward relief. The thought becomes the explanation that allows the behavior to proceed. And that is why insight alone cannot reliably stop addictive patterns. Insight will tell you what happened. It will help you name a pattern and understand the cost. But if the valuation system has learned that a behavior changes your state quickly and reliably, then the brain will keep assigning that behavior as important under pressure. So obviously with cereal or granola or purchasing a plant, the consequences are way smaller. But with alcohol, opioids, stimulants, gambling, sex, rage, avoidance, toxic relationship patterns, the same system scales up. High dopamine means stronger salience in the brain, meaning the brain tags it as more important. And with that, more withdrawal pressure, more tolerance, more narrowing, and then less space between having an urge and choosing an action. So this episode is about the moment before the behavior looks like a behavior. The moment before the drink, before you send the text, before you open the app and start scrolling, before the purchase, before the lie, before the relapse, before the person ends up in the therapy chair and says, I don't even know why I did what I did. There's usually a sequence, and it started earlier. It started in the body. It started with stress, fatigue, and a familiar emotional state. It starts when the brain begins assigning value to something that had worked in the past. And that is what we're going to look at today, is why knowing does not stop the loop. Why consequences often fail to compete with immediate relief, and why the decision begins before the person experiences it as a decision. And that is why the real work has to move earlier in the sequence. Your OFC is one of the brain's systems that is involved in valuation. What that means is that it helps determine what has importance, what has potential reward, and what deserves attention, and what action is worth moving toward. And it's fast. We're talking about like milliseconds. It's reading the room internally before you even have a clean verbal explanation for what's taking place. And it's pulling from your past experiences, emotional memory, your current body state, learned associations, stress level, fatigue, and the expected relief from the behavior. So if a person says, I don't know why I did that, actually sometimes that could be factually accurate from the level of conscious awareness. They did not consciously walk through each step. A lot of people live on autopilot. As y'all know, I just got back from Italy. You want to see autopilot? Go to an airport. Holy shit, everybody is just on autopilot, not paying attention. Everyone's first day being alive ever. They don't walk through every conscious step. They become aware after the system has already started moving. So if you're in a cereal aisle buying some granola, looks simple. You see the bag, your body already knows the association. This is going to go great with peanut butter at 1 o'clock in the morning. That changes the state. It gives me something, and this works fast. It's worked before. The bag is not neutral. It has a learned value. And the future cost is something that is available intellectually. Maybe after the fact, you can think about regret or remember how you felt the next day with guts that are full of peanut butter and granola. And then you're driving to Planet Fitness to get on an elliptical to burn 300 calories. And you're like, ugh. You can remember the annoyance. You can remember the pattern. but those memories may lack the same force as immediate pull. Immediate relief lands in the body. Future cost often stays conceptual until later. So the brain does what it's trained to do, and it moves toward what changes the state quickly. This is why saying to yourself in the cereal aisle, I'm just going to portion it out, is important. It sounds like it's reasonable and that I have a plan, but inside the sequence, it is functioning as permission for me to do something that I know is going to cost me later. The system wants the behavior. The conscious mind then supplies a reason. People usually locate the problem at the point of action, like when the bag is opened, or after the drink is poured, or after their phone is already in their hand, the porn website is up, the message has already been typed out, or the car is turning into the bar or the familiar place. That is where behavior becomes visible, but the loop is way before that. It may have started in the morning with poor sleep, or it may have started with tension, irritability, boredom, being overstimulated, past shame getting activated, resentment at your, shit boss that you work for, feeling lonely, low sense pressure that never got named. So nothing dramatic has to happen. That's the part that a lot of people miss, because often they are expecting a very clear trigger, and sometimes that's the case, that there might be a major rejection or a fight in your relationship or a major reaction. But sometimes it's smaller, like just having a long day or too much noise, too much responsibility, a body that feels unsettled, a mind that has been grinding for hours, and enough friction builds, and then the nervous system starts looking for anything that will help regulate. The OFC scans through your learned history. So it's asking, well, what do we know has worked quickly before? What will change this state? What's going to bring relief, or what's going to reduce pressure? And that might be food. It might be an orgasm. It might be alcohol. It might be drugs. It might be raging out. It might be disappearing, controlling somebody else, going numb. That is why the behavior can feel sudden, even if it had a long runway. The visible action is late in the chain because the body state is what came first, then the valuation came next, then the story came after. Then the behavior looked like a choice that was made in the moment, but it wasn't the case. So the OFC does not evaluate what is happening right now. It evaluates through stored emotional memory. This is important because a lot of the patterns that people repeat were learned long before they had any explanation for them. Your early experiences teach the body what feels safe, what feels threatening, what feels soothing, what feels familiar, and what's going to relieve pressure. And those lessons don't always show up as explicit memories. They show up as gut reactions, emotional tone, immediate interpretations, fast impulses, a pull towards something, a push away from something, a familiar sense that something needs to happen now. So, in the cereal aisle, it might look like food, but for a person with addiction, it might look like the substance, or in a relationship, it might look like the other person. Underneath this, the system might be responding to an old regulation pattern. So without you even being consciously aware, internally it's saying, this is how I settle, this is how I get out of discomfort, this is how I feel in control, this is how I feel not exposed, this is how I change the channel inside my body. And this is why telling someone to think it through often fails. That can be a helpful intervention, but not always, because people might already be thinking. The problem is that thinking has entered the room after the body has already made a decision and has already assigned value. Once you start, the system changes. So, have you ever noticed the first bite or drink or hit or click or text matters? This is one reason why I try to avoid sugar. So I explain to people, I've got addictive wiring, high brain reward salience for addictive stuff. And so I have known people who will take a bite of a super sugary processed Publix cake and go, oh my gosh, it's so rich. And they have like a couple of bites of it and they're like, no, I'm good. And for me, as soon as I have a little bit of that in my system, the whole reward system just changes. Every cell in my body lights up and I go, after I finish this piece, I must finish the rest of the cake and drive to Publix and get 6 more cakes to make sure that I don't ever run out, so that I don't ever have to feel not living with this cake experience, right? As crazy as that sounds, and as much as the rational part of me knows I'm going to feel terrible, my guts are going to be inside out, I'm going to have diarrhea, I'm going to feel like a fat pig and hate everything that I just did, a different part of my brain is going to go, oh, but it's so good. Do it anyway. Dopamine is less about simple pleasure than people think. It's deeply involved in drive, reinforcement, pursuit, learning, and repeating behavior. Once the behavior starts, the system can shift from evaluation into pursuit. So, before the first bite, there might be a thought of, I'm only going to have a little bit. And then, after the first bite, the system updates in real time and it goes, oh yes, this is working. Stay right here. Continue, repeat, more, more, more. That is why the person who has planned moderation might suddenly realize moderation has lost force. The promise was made before the reinforcement loop in the brain was fully activated, and this is the part that makes addictive behavior so difficult. The person is often trying to apply a future-oriented plan inside of a state that has become immediate, narrowed, and reward-driven. And in the moment, the brain is not running a balanced moral inventory, it's responding to reinforcement. And that reinforcement is giving strong information. This is going to change how I feel. This reduces something. This gives me something. This works. This data is stored. The fact that the person later regrets it is also stored, but the timing is different. And that timing is important as well, because the brain does not encode reward and consequence equally when they arrive at different points in the sequence. The reward comes early, the cost comes late. The pleasure, relief, intensity, escape, numbness, or the shift happens at the beginning and during the behavior. The regret, shame, physical discomfort, destroyed trust, financial cost, and the cleanup comes afterward. So the brain learns to reward while the person is inside the behavior, but then, in a different state, then the bill gets paid. And that's why consequences often fail to stop addictive loops, because from the outside, we'll say things like, don't you see what that's costing you? And yeah, the person knows the cost. They know exactly what it costs. They can probably list the damage better than anybody. But when the activated system comes online again, it is solving the immediate state of, how do I feel better now? How do I change this internal pressure? And the future cost does not always compete well with immediate relief. This is the reason why when I ran DBT groups, I had clients that they knew every skill for nervous system regulation, and yet if there was some sort of a crisis in their relationship, all of the skills went out the window, and they were telling me, I'm going to use, if they even came. Usually, if somebody decides they're going to use, they're not even going to call. They're not going to go to the meeting. They're not going to go to therapy. They're just going to use. The cereal example works, the granola example works because the system is easier to see. It's got lower intensity, smaller consequences, and a quicker recovery. But scale that same structure to substance use. Substances, alcohol, pick your poison, any of them, they produce a much stronger neurochemical effect than natural rewards of eating too much peanut butter and granola at 2 o'clock in the morning. They push dopamine and other reinforcement systems far beyond ordinary levels. And then the brain adapts. It has to, because repeated intense reward changes the baseline. It changes sensitivity. Our bodies are always looking for homeostasis, and if you're flooding the system all the time with reward chemicals, it's going to downregulate, and it's going to change sensitivity and change what feels normal and change what feels worth doing. And it also changes what the brain tags as important. So this is where salience comes in. Salience means that your brain is assigning something as important. And in addiction, the substance becomes disproportionately important. Other things still matter to the person. Their health may matter, their family may matter, their work may matter, their integrity, their future. But in an activated state, the substance becomes the loudest signal in the room, and it becomes the thing that the brain is tagging as, this is the most urgent thing ever. In the documentary Pleasure Unwoven, Kevin McCulley talks about how for a person in the active addiction cycle, the drug equals survival. The drug equals the next 2 minutes alive. And I don't know about you, but I would do some really messed up shit if I was backed into a corner and I had to do something to survive. And this is what happens when the brain is sick with addiction is, I don't care what the cost is. I don't care if DCF takes my kids. I don't care if I lose the relationship. I have to survive. I have to breathe. So that is why it becomes the loudest signal in the system. The brain is treating this as the most urgent thing ever, and that's why addiction looks insane from the outside, because the person knows all of this, but is losing the competition from the inside state. Your brain is always trying to maintain balance. I'm going to go back to that homeostasis part. That means that the system is trying to return to a workable baseline. And if a person repeatedly uses a substance that pushes reward, relief, being sedated, stimulated, or escaping, the brain compensates. The receptors in your brain change their sensitivity. Baseline dopamine can drop, and stress systems can become more reactive. This means normal rewards like an orgasm or feeling accomplished after a workout, those things can become weak, and then your ordinary life starts to feel very flat. This leads to drops in motivation, normal pleasure decreases, your irritability rises, and then the person still looks functional from the outside, but internally the baseline has changed. And that is one of the major shifts in addiction. Because at first, a person might use to feel good, better, or different, but then over time, they use just to feel normal. And then they might even get to a point where they use just to avoid feeling terrible or avoid feeling sick or avoid feeling in pain. The goal changes. The substance becomes less about pleasure and more about relief from the state that the brain itself helped create through adaptation. That is what withdrawal is. That is why the value of substances increases even though the consequences keep getting worse. It removes something negative, it quiets the body, and it restores baseline even though it's only for 5 seconds. The OFC in the brain reads this as extremely valuable. When the valuation system and the emotional systems are under strain, then your interpretation changes. A neutral situation can start to feel negative, an ambiguous interaction can start to feel personal, and even a little minor cue can feel very intense. Someone's tone, a delay in a response, a facial expression, a small inconvenience, a normal frustration. The system tags it as a loaded interaction. Now internal pressure spikes, and then the person feels disrespected, threatened, trapped, rejected, bored, restless, ashamed, agitated. It could just be a small cue, but the internal response in the body is massive. Then the brain starts scanning for relief. This is how a person can end up saying, I was triggered, even though the outside event was really minor. Sometimes the trigger is external, sometimes it's internal. It could be a memory, could be a body state, a prediction about the future, a learned association, a familiar emotional tone. Your brain does not need the cereal aisle, doesn't need the bar, doesn't need your ex's name showing up in the text message. It can generate craving from even just a thought, memory, discomfort, or anticipation. The system can fire from the inside. Tolerance develops when the same amount no longer produces the same effect. So what used to work stops working as well. The person starts to increase the quantity, the frequency, the intensity, or the risk. Then the loop tightens. The baseline becomes lower. The need becomes higher. The withdrawal is stronger. The consequences get worse. The behavior carries more cost, but the internal pressure also carries more force. And this is where people really lose more and more space. Early in the process, they may have a wider gap between their urge and the action, but over time, the gap shrinks, the person moves faster, the drink gets poured, the contact with the ex gets made, the lie comes out, the app opens, the purchase happens, all of it happens, and then the awareness catches up and they go, I don't even remember deciding. Honest description, because the system had momentum before conscious awareness had even fully arrived. Early repetition shapes regulation. So if a person learns early that relief comes through escape, numbing, consumption, control, caretaking, rage, intensity, avoidance, the nervous system builds around that pattern. And this is especially true if somebody grew up in chaos, emotional unpredictability, addiction, neglect, threat, chronic shame, or inconsistent caregiving. The brain learns what works before a person even has adult language for it. And under stress, those people often regress to older strategies. So they might have low frustration tolerance, faster escalation, impulsive behavior, or difficulty holding multiple perspectives, or difficulty staying connected when they're uncomfortable. This is why adult behavior can look irrational while still following an internal logic. The system returns to what it learned first. Addiction rarely stays contained because the same valuation system is involved in everything. A substance might stop, but other loops can still remain active, like choosing the wrong relationships, reacting quickly, creating intensity in situations that don't warrant it, trying to control outcomes, or reading threat in places that are actually quite neutral, or using insight to avoid action. The substance may have been one expression of that loop, but the underlying system is what needs to be calibrated. A person can understand patterns and still repeat them. That's what frustrates people, is they can expect insight to create immediate change. Insight does matter because it gives you language and can help you identify the sequence. It can even support accountability. But knowing does not automatically reassign value in the brain. The valuation system changes through repeated, different experience, so the brain needs new data. I felt this and did not do that. I wanted relief, but I tolerated pressure instead. I moved the decision earlier. I removed access by not going down the cereal aisle at all. I interrupted the sequence. That is different from understanding the pattern. Understanding shows you the loop, but repetition changes the loop. Most people try to stop the behavior at the point of action, and that's the hardest place to do it. At 2 a.m., after you've already bought the granola, then you're likely to already have made the bad decision. Or if you're at the liquor store, the route has already happened. If you have already poured the first drink, the reinforcement loop is already active. Unless there's a gun to your head, you're probably not going to change the behavior. The work has to happen earlier, before the aisle, before the store, before the contact with the ex, before the ritual, before the body state got too hot. If it is in your environment, you are negotiating. If the access exists, the loop has more oxygen. So this is one of the reasons why I don't allow alcohol in my home. Not because I think that I'm gonna end up hitting a bottle of wine if it's in the fridge, but if it's there, then the possibility is there. And my mom loved saying from a young age to my sister and I, if you don't want to slip, don't go where it's slippery. You cannot test moderation with something that already has a track record, and you cannot rely on a future version of yourself to behave differently under pressure. You have to move the decision earlier. With cereal, it means it doesn't come home. With alcohol, that might mean no alcohol in the house, driving a different route, changing your routine, blocking contacts, having a different evening structure, and accountability before the craving even happens. With relationships, that might mean no late night texting, no checking profiles, no closure conversations that are actually really about access seeking, and no leaving the door cracked open and then being surprised when you're in the same loop again. The earlier decision protects the later state. When the behavior is removed, the internal state often gets louder. It might seem like restlessness, agitation, pressure, bargaining, like saying, I'm only going to have wine on celebratory events, or I'm only going to buy the granola to put it inside of 16 different bags and not going to eat the whole thing. The system expects relief and doesn't get it. This is where people fold. They read the intensity as the signal that something is wrong, but the intensity is part of the process. The brain has been trained. If I feel this, then I do this. And when that sequence is interrupted, the body is going to protest. That protest is where learning starts. Notice when the state arises, when it peaks, and then when it shifts. There's a worksheet that's used in addiction clinics or on therapist aid or whatever called urge surfing. And that's exactly what it is just noticing the peak and that it's not going to last forever. In fact, most urges don't last more than like 3 to 5 minutes, maybe 15, but you have to do something to change it though. The old behavior cannot complete the loop. That's how you put in new data. That's how you change the behavior. The urge does not require action. The body state might be intense, but it's also survivable. That's how valuation begins to change. And one interruption usually feels very unimpressive, which is why people might dismiss it. They want the urge to disappear. They want one clean decision to have rewritten the whole pattern. But the brain updates through repetition. 5 interruptions, 10, 20, 50, 1,000. more. The OFC then recalibrates what matters, what works, and what is worth pursuing. The behavior loses dominance, the urge loses urgency, the old loop becomes less automatic. This takes longer than people want, and it's why a lot of people quit early. They expect changed feelings before their system has had enough repeated new evidence. And recovery often looks boring at the same exact point where the brain is learning. The same moment handled differently again and again and again. That's how automatic behavior becomes optional. So, your brain has learned what changes your system quickly and reliably. It assigns value based on that learning, and then it pushes behavior towards what has worked in the past. With cereal or granola, the pattern is easy to see because the consequence is smaller. But with substances, the same pattern gets amplified by dopamine, reward salience, tolerance, withdrawal, narrowed attention, and a new baseline. The behavior that looks like one bad decision is usually the end of a much longer sequence that included body state, emotional memory, stress, learned association, valuation, access, negotiation, action, and then afterward they go, why did I do that? Well, the answer was way before the behavior. That's where the work has to go. Control the environment, interrupt the sequence, remove access, expect it to be uncomfortable. Repeat the interruption enough times until the brain has enough evidence to update. Do not wait for the version of you at 2 a.m. to become regulated, wise, future-oriented, and disciplined. That version is already under pressure. So protect that version by making decisions earlier. That is how you interrupt the cycle. That's how you learn healthier, newer behaviors, and that is doing the work. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to people around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we're all capable of growing past that. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. In the meantime, thanks again for listening. I'll see you on the next one.